state of fisheries. Fisheries exemplify common property resources and are often managed inefficiently. They're typically shared by fishermen, and this is especially the case for marine fisheries, in a way that resembles open access, in that profitability for many fisheries is very low. In fact, it's close to zero. And actually many deep sea fisheries provide more evidence for Hardin's tragedy of the commons than they do for Ostrom's optimism. In a recent report about the state of the world's fisheries that comes out of the Food and Agriculture Organization, which is part of the United Nations, then they identify that marine fisheries are heavily overexploited, so about 30% are overexploited, and the remaining 57% are fully exploited. But they also identify that fisheries are important nutritionally, so important source of protein, and they also provide livelihoods to a large number of people, so estimated to be about 55 million people worldwide. This graph indicates the trend of overfishing and full exploitation, and shows how that's increased since 1974. This graph from 1950 through to 2014 shows two trends. First of all, that production from capture fisheries, that's fishing for wild fish in the sea and to a small extent in freshwater, has stagnated since the late 1980s. So production from capture fisheries is not increasing. What is increasing though is production from aquaculture, and aquaculture is basically making up for the shortfall in supply that is left by the failure of capture fisheries to increase production. So I'd just like to run through a couple of examples of where fisheries have collapsed. So the North Sea herring catch, this during the 1950s and through to the 1970s was a significant fishery. By 1978 though, it had effectively completely collapsed. The other example is the US Atlantic cod landings. So that was being developed from the 1950s, peaked in the 80s and the 90s, and then had collapsed by the early 2000s. This pattern of overshoot, overfishing, and then collapse can be characterized in this graph. So through time, the annual fish catch increases, so that's given by this this solid dark line here, and then fishing reaches a peak. The stock is unable to sustain the fishing, and typically fisheries regulators and the politicians have got a choice. Do they allow the fishery to peak and then collapse? So it's possibly where fishermen make quite a lot of money at this stage, but then if they don't manage to regulate the fishery and convert it into a sustainable fishery, then it ends up that the fishery actually disappears completely, as did the North Sea herring fishery and the US Atlantic cod fishery. And there are many other examples of where fisheries have had a surge of catch and then a collapse. So why do fisheries collapse? Well, I suppose it's about fishermen and countries grabbing a share of the fish stocks, and they've got no confidence that the fishery can be managed sustainably, so they just go full out to catch as many fish in the current period. It's also a failure of politicians to manage fisheries efficiently by reducing fishing effort through a whole range of different policy alternatives. And it also results from not accounting for the value of fish in the sea to support biomass growth. So if you're catching a fish today, then it's not there to breed and produce more fish tomorrow. And typically the running down of stocks doesn't account for the fact that if you hold more stock in the higher stocks of fish in the sea, then fish are actually cheaper to catch. So this cartoon summarizes the situation. In 1910 there were plenty of fish and not too many trawlers catching those fish. By 2010 then we've got high levels of fishing effort, high levels of trawlers, but not many fish left in the sea.